Thank you.
All right, welcome back after that quick recess. We are picking up work on H 474. We have a proposal of amendment on that, which is our act relating to miscellaneous changes to election laws. And we have two representatives here to discuss their proposal of amendment. Then we'll go to council to review the details of the words on the page. Representative McCoy, Representative
For the
Higley.
record,
Thank you.
Representative McCoy from Rutland One.
And Representative Mark Higley from the Orleans Lamoille District.
So thank you for having us today. I believe you have an amendment in front of you. Mine says draft 1.2 this morning at 8 a.m. Correct? Okay. So in looking at the original bill that I haven't also in front of me, this bill strikes out section 2 in its entirety. And when I worked with Ledge Council yesterday, suggested removing it because the words that I wanted removed was the only thing that you had added in. So we just removed that section. Have you got all of this already?
No, we have not. No. Yep.
And-
Not formally, anything. Not formally at the table like this.
And then also, so they have just removed that whole section in its entirety. Section 3 is deleted. And then section 9 is the one that I think we spent the most time on a few days ago. And this is the language, when I spoke to Legislative Counsel, Tim Devlin, yesterday, I explained what I wanted to happen, the close of polls at 7 p.m. A candidate comes in and, says, could you please count whatever race they were interested in having counted. But additionally, my concern was the disenfranchisement of voters that actually went into the ballot, it went into their voting booth and voted and wrote in a write-in candidate. And this precluding the clerk from actually counting any write-ins. So I think this covers the intent of which I wanted, that there's a notwithstanding clause in here that says notwithstanding section A of this section, a candidate who has not filed in accordance with this subsection shall qualify as a primary winner if the candidate otherwise complies with the provisions of this subsection. So my concern was a particular race, and I'm just going to take our state representative slot, primary election. You would need 50 write-ins in order to qualify as a candidate for the general election. So if the clerk, in looking through her tape at the end of the night, or knowing that however many write-ins she has, if it exceeds 50, they should count the write-ins. They should actually record the write-ins, because somebody might have 50 and may qualify. And simply because they didn't, tell the clerks before the close of polls at 7 p.m., I don't think their right as a voter should be violated, disenfranchised. So that's what this part of this section means. And this is in triplicate. So there's 3 separate places with the same language. My assumption is I don't have to go through the 3 separate sections.
No, we'll do that with council. Yeah.
Okay. And I think you'll see the rules for counting. It goes on how you're going to count, and they file in accordance with the sections that are the new sections in triplicate. And I think we're going to go on. It's the same. I think the other one is about the checking of getting a checking account. And my concern there was a lot of times now banks are charging $10 a month to have a checking account. And there are some of us, I don't not many, and I don't even know who now, but my former roommate never raised a penny and never spent a penny on her campaign. So the notion that when she files, when she goes on and opens up her campaign finance, she would have to open up a campaign finance report and at the same time have a banking account. Whether, regardless of whether she files, she doesn't earn, expend or raise any money. So this language here allows them to go into the system, set up a campaign finance report so that the Secretary of State is aware that they have one. And whatever I know our next filing deadline is July. In July, this candidate, like this year, would have to go in and say, I have raised nor expended any monies, and just click on it. And she's filed, I would have filed for that particular quarter. And I think that satisfies what the Secretary of State is requiring and not, in making it more difficult for a candidate who does not want to raise or expend money and just, I'm not quite sure that would ever happen again, but that's what my roommate did. So I'm thinking in that term. And even, some of us may not expend money until they get closer to the November election either. So that first time, they may not expend any money during the primary, but yet in May, they have petitioned and filed. So May, June, July, August, September, they have this checking account and they're paying $10 a month for really nothing. And I think that's all of section 9. But I do want to bring up one other section when I was reading your 36-page bill, and I just ask that you look at this because there's something in here about municipal elections and changing the 6 Mondays before the election to the 5th Monday before an election to file your petition. And if you wouldn't not mind to look at that in a few calendar years to see if that 5th Monday before the election satisfies the no more than 40, no less than 30-day requirement. Because the closer you get to that 30 days, having in mind the petition can come in that 5th Monday, well, the clerk still has to get those petitions, stay open till 5 o'clock, get the petition, complete the draft ballot that they have, get it to the printer. The printer has to, get it ready, mail it back to the clerk. She has to proof it along with, probably the town manager or school district treasurer. Then get it back to the printer, to have it printed, to get it back no more than 40, no less than 30 days. They have to have the ballot back by 30 days. So that's my only thing, and it's one less week for the clerks to actually do that. So that's
Okay. Representative Hancock.
Thank you. Do you have any idea where in the bill that was, Representative?
No, I didn't dream it. I did see it.
Council seems to,
Is in section 32 on page 30. So starting on line 18 on page 30, all the way
Oh, there it is. Yeah.
line 9 is page 30.
What draft are you on?
Or excuse me. It's on the next
It's on line
page.
14.
Bill is introduced.
Page
Bill is
31, line
introduced.
11.
That was just me looking through the bill last evening. I haven't talked to anybody about it.
Yeah.
It's on
Yeah.
31. Yeah.
I thought it was
Starts at the top of
1.8.
31, but the section starts at 81.
Time out. We should be on 1.
I'm looking at your bill was introduced,
Okay.
page 474. Page 30 on line 11, it amends section 2681, subdivision A1A, deadline 6 to the 5th Monday of the election.
So you discuss away on that one, but I saw that in reading the whole bill last night.
We'll flag that for conversation when we move over to greater detail, but we'll take a look at that piece as well.
Any
Does-
questions?
Yeah, no. Anyone have any questions? Representative Watterson.
Thank you. I have a question about the section, where, what did I hear? With the party nominations,
Party nomination.
right?
Yep.
Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because when we all run for office, we, technically, if you run in we all had to get a petition signed and you have to get a certain number of signatures. And then we are actually, attempting to, this bill proposes increasing the number of signatures you need or votes you need to get for a write-in. So if we're bringing that all up to be equal and to get the timing kind of where it needs to be, then can you explain to me the thought process behind not a party not running somebody in a primary and then just whatever that municipal or county or town committee is, just being able to select that candidate and not have them do any of the work to get to the point where that everyone else has to do to get on the ballot? I'm like, do you understand what I'm saying?
I
The
understand.
threshold gets increasingly lower as it gets closer to the election. And I'm wondering why that is something that's a priority.
Are we talking about the major political parties actually having 6 days after the primary to actually nominate,
Yes, and the party nomination after
which is
the primary.
in 6 days of the
Yeah.
primary? They're all treated equally. Every major party candidate has the same. Progressives, Democrats, and Republicans have that same 6 days after the primary. There's no difference.
Right, I'm talking about the part where nobody runs in the primary and then the party just appoints it. Like,
That's what.
yes, so I'm just asking sort of in a general, like, how does that serve voter? And how does that create, because I don't think that we should be making laws to improve the process or to improve the experience for candidates, like it's more voters.
That's the current law.
Yeah,
That's
yes, I'm saying what your objection is to our proposed law to change that.
Well, you're deleting that section. And I oppose.
Right, and that's what I mean. Sorry, I was getting dragged around, but but you understand what I'm saying. Like, can you explain the philosophy of that, lowering the threshold as you get closer?
So a lot of times we're still in session. So it may be difficult for some of us to get around and get our 50 signatures. And if you're considering increasing that, I don't know if that's what you said. Maybe I misunderstood what you said. So I've never had an issue with that, even as a town clerk. I mean, parties, they're political parties. We run as in political parties. So the notion that the political party has 6 extra days after a primary to, appoint someone there. Somebody who ran in the primary maybe decided the day after or something happened to them and I just can't do it. I can't do it. We're allowing the major political parties 6 days after the primary to appoint somebody to fill that race.
And if I can too, you said that it benefits the candidate, but I also think it benefits the voters too. If there's a name there rather than just blank space, that to me is a better process than just having no name there at all.
Representative Stone?
I was wondering, I have a question about section 9. In order to have votes listed for a write-in candidate under subdivision 2587. This title, not later than 7 p.m. on the day of the primary election. I'm wondering, I have concerns about that being a tight timeline and there being greater room for error. And also, I was wondering if you took into account how long it takes to get things printed, because we've heard sometimes it can take like 3 weeks, like a long time to get things printed up and ready.
Are you talking about the 6? So there's 2 questions here.
Okay. Yes.
Okay, so the first one with the 7 p.m.
Yep.
That was actually, I would consider it a concession between the Secretary of State's office and the Clerks Association, which I believe you're hearing from a lobbyist and a clerk here to that effect. And I didn't come up with that. My concern in this whole thing was disenfranchising the voters and not actually recording their write-in votes. And I think I think the clerks are still gonna have to look at their tape to make sure that, there may be somebody in there that did not file that piece of paper that could have won the nomination, but for filing that. And I think this takes care of that, this language. The second one was the timeline.
Type 10.
So that's why it is currently 6 Mondays. This is for municipal elections. This is 6 Mondays before the election. So 6 Mondays before town meeting, the traditional town meeting, Tuesday. First Tuesday after the first Monday in March, whatever. So I think the 5 Mondays before is a tight timeline for town clerks to get that. If I would keep it to the 6th Monday, but that's just me talking as a former town clerk. You can certainly ask the town clerk, the current town clerk seated here. Historically, it would probably take, when the back and forth time, depending, it's probably about 4 days before you finally get the proof, okay, hit the print button for the printer and they print it. And then it's probably another, depending on the size of your town. I mean, I used to print 1,000 ballots. It would probably take upwards of a week after that. So it's a quick, and if they know what the timeline is, I have to say, I need this by, February 2nd or something. 9 times out of 10, they'll do it, but it's a crunch for the printer as well as the town.
Any other questions for the presenters of the amendment? All right.
Yeah.
We appreciate
Thank you
it.
very much. I appreciate all your time. I appreciate the few days ago that we hashed it out.
No, it's time to get all this on the table now. Okay, committee, I think I want to have council come up right now and discuss the amendment in more detail. And then we'll get to the testimony from our guests in the gallery.
All right, good afternoon, Tucker Anderson Legislative Council. I'm filling in for my colleague Tim Devlin today. For purposes of walking you through this amendment, you should be looking at draft 1.2 of the amendment from Representatives Higley, McCoy, and Toof for H474. The first instance of amendment and second instance of amendment strike sections 2 and 3, which, if you go back to the bill as introduced, are under the reader assistance heading for the failure of a major political party to nominate a candidate by primary. These first 2 instances of amendment strike H474's proposed amendments to 17 VSA section 2381, which describes the applicability of that subchapter and removes, for purposes of its applicability, when a major political party candidate is failed to be nominated by primary. And in section 3, there is a conforming amendment in 17 VSA section 2386. So the proposed amendment would eliminate both of those sections from H474.
Understood.
Moving into the third instance of amendment, this would propose to strike out section 9 of H474 as introduced and insert in lieu thereof a new section 9. I'll walk you through the language that is being proposed here, and based on my quickly jotted down notes, highlight some of the significant changes here. In subsection A within 17 VSA, section 2370, the proposed amendment states that in order to have votes listed for a write-in candidate, not later than 7 p.m. on the day of the primary election, a write-in candidate for General Assembly, any state office, or any federal office shall complete a form of the Secretary of State's design affirming that the candidate wants to have received votes listed under subdivision 2587E3 of Title 17. The two changes here. First, H474 proposed that the deadline would be the second Friday preceding the primary election. Here, that changes it to 7 p.m. on the day of the primary election. The second change is that in H474, the form that would be filed would be a consent to be a candidate. And here it is going to be a form designed by the Secretary of State, effectively consenting to being a write-in candidate. The following sentence states that the candidate shall file the form with either all of the town clerks within the applicable district or the Secretary of State's office in an electronic manner approved by the Secretary. This sentence is completely new, but it allows simultaneously that the candidate could either file directly with the town clerks or with the Secretary of State in an electronic format.
Representative Hooper.
Does this interfere with the clerks who on election day start to process ballots and the machine would not record the name, it would only record that there was a write-in? So you effectively would have to go back through all the ballots and see who the designated name was.
The way that this is structured is that this is only going to affect counting, which is after the actual names are presented.
All right.
Right?
7 o'clock.
Yes, after 7, after the polls have closed, the election is closed. That's the time frame that would be working within here. The sentence that follows that new sentence is the same as in the underlying bill, but I'll still highlight it for you that the Secretary of State is required to notify the appropriate town clerks of any filings that are made according to this section. In subsection B, there is, and Representative McCoy highlighted this, some new language that notwithstands the requirements of this section. So notwithstanding provisions of subsection A that require filing before 7 p.m. on the day of the primary election, a candidate who has not filed in accordance with that deadline shall qualify as a primary winner if the candidate otherwise complies with the provisions of this subsection. So even if you don't comply with subsection A's requirements, win, which is what is described in subsection B, you are the winner.
Representative Waters Evans.
Doesn't that unrequire the requiring?
Yeah.
So why require it in the first place?
You win.
Think you're the winner.
I'm struggling. So only if you win.
Only if you win does it count.
Like there was 3 people and you were the winner.
Okay.
For those candidates who do not comply with subsection A and who do not win, they will not, there's a provision later for how they will be counted on the tally sheet as other write-ins.
Representative Hingham.
Thank you. My question is simply when it says that the candidate shall file the form with either all town clerks within the candidate's applicable district or the Secretary of State's office in an electronic manner. It doesn't state how the candidate files the form with all of the town clerks. And I would like clarity whether that is to be in writing, whether it's to be by voice, or whether it can be by electronic means as well. So I'm just flagging that for the committee that I think it's a little broad right here.
I will note that without any case law to back me up, I can't appropriately answer your question, but I would say that in Title 17, there are meaningful clauses that describe when things are allowed to be submitted electronically and when they are either expressly or implicitly required to be what's known as wet. So typically within petitions, we are dealing with wet ink delivery requirements, so to speak.
Okay, that's good to know. So it couldn't be something that's, for instance, one of my town clerks is like 30 miles from my house. It couldn't be faxed or a picture of it taken and emailed to that clerk. So that's why I want clarification.
My proposal would be that if you want this to reflect a particular policy choice about how this has to be delivered to the clerks, that you call it out specifically.
Okay, thank you. So if you could flag that for discussion, I would appreciate it.
If we are ready,
Representative Morgan?
No, I just, a follow on to that is, so it sounds like I'm in a multi town district, like a lot of us are. You file your initial, candidates file initially with your shire town. And in this case, sounds like you'd have to go to every town and do that, correct? Wouldn't be just for the shire, wouldn't be responsible then for notifying the other clerks, I guess,
you would have to file the form. with
At all.
with each town clerk in your district. Okay.
Electronically to the Secretary of State's office.
So there is two options,
I'm sorry,
or electronically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
send them an email.
The fourth instance of amendment strikes out section 10 of H 474 in its entirety and inserts a new section 10 amending 17 VSA section 2472 with some conforming amendments, as the presenter of the amendment pointed out. Here within subdivision B5A, which you'll find on page 3, same requirement in order to have votes listed. The filing has to be made not later than 7 p.m. on the day of the primary election for write-in candidates for the General Assembly, any state office, or any federal office. Similar requirement to file with the town clerks or electronically with the Secretary of State. Okay.
Any questions there? Seeing hands.
We're on page 4, the fifth instance of amendment. It strikes out section 11 of H 474. Amends 17 VSA section 2587, the rules for counting votes, and proposes new section 11, amending the same section of Title 17. Here in subdivision E2, a vote for a write-in candidate shall be counted as a write-in vote. It is without requisite filings unless the write-in candidate filed in accordance with a technical correction later, sections 2370, 2472, or 2702 of Title 17. The clerk shall record the name and vote totals of a write-in candidate who has complied with this section. So this is going to be the distinction that I just described between those who comply with the requirement to file by 7 p.m. on the date of the primary and those who do not. Subdivision 3A, the election official counting the ballots and tallying results shall list only the names and votes received of those write-in candidates who filed in accordance with the applicable sections of Title 17. Any write-in votes for candidates who have not filed in accordance with those sections shall be listed as other write-ins. Remembering that in that subsection B that we covered, the winner still win because that requirement is not withstood if you win. Page 5, there's a conforming amendment again. Names of persons who have not filed in accordance with those sections shall not be listed individually and shall be recorded on the tally sheet as a blank vote in aggregate as other write-ins. Okay. Moving through page 5, section 12 is struck out by the sixth instance of amendment, replaced with a new section 12 amending the same 17 VSA section 2702. And if you move into page 6, you will see the same language, another conforming amendment for purposes of this section. All right. Thank you. Moving into page 7, the seventh instance of amendment. Strikes out section 13, amending 17 VSA, section 2921 in its entirety, and inserts a new section 13, amending the same section. This is going to relate to filing of registration with the Secretary of State's office around expenditures. In this language, under subdivision A1, each candidate who files a consent to the printing of the candidate's name on the ballot as provided in section 2361 shall register with the Secretary of State. The temporal language and the threshold dollar amounts are struck. Just requires prior to the filing of the consent stating the candidate's full name and address and the office the candidate is seeking. So those are the bare registration requirements that don't take into consideration the finance amounts here yet.
And you got Representative Pango, then.
The consent to the printing of the candidate's name, I understand when we file in May that we're consenting to be on the ballot. But this new declaration form that would be filed by 7 PM on election day, does that count as the consent to be printed on the ballot?
That's something that would be separate.
Okay,
right?
so
Because
that
that's
would,
applicable to the write-ins.
that would have to occur at some point after 7 PM on election night
Yes,
for a write-in candidate.
or write-in.
Everybody else would have filed ahead of time their
Correct.
consent. So do we have anything in the bill about a write-in candidate or in underlying statute for a write-in candidate to consent to be printed on the ballot?
I will have to pull up section 2361, and I'm sure that even as I'm doing this research, that you might hear from later witnesses who could clarify whether 2361 requires write-in candidates by a time or date certain to
I'm just wondering how those
file that
pieces fit
consent, right?
together. Thank you.
Representative Bissell.
I think I see a typo, extra. I think on line 16, it says the candidate's full name and address, and then we have a semicolon and a comma.
That is striking the semicolon and replacing it with a comma, which is.
I don't see that underline under the. Oh, it's striking
Oh,
the
it's
comma.
striking the, yes.
Comma. Gotcha, okay.
Yes, it's
Gotcha.
difficult to see sometimes.
Accept.
It's even more difficult during statutory revision when we're trying to figure out why there's an extra semicolon. It's sometimes just that little strike mark gets missed.
Gotcha, the same with that, the can't see. Gotcha.
Yes.
All right.
Moving into subdivision 2, each candidate who accepts or expends any campaign funds shall file with the Secretary of State at the time of expending funds. So splits the registration and filing here with the Secretary of State into 2 stages. First is the registration. Here's who I am. This is the office that I'm seeking. Then if you are raising or expending funds, the requirement for registering with the Secretary of State, including that bank information, is triggered. On page 8, the 8th instance of amendment strikes out section 14 of H 474, replaces it with a new section 14, and this strikes language relating to the required threshold amounts for registration, and does the same thing in subdivision A2 that we just covered, which is it ties the registration requirement concerning financial information, bank accounts, to the actual expenditure of funds. And all of that is accomplished in subdivision A2 through striking existing language. That's the entirety of the amendments here to H 474. I hope that I did a moderately competent job of guiding you through that. And thank you to
More than moderate.
Tim out in the ether for doing all of this work.
Excellent. All right, thank you, council. Next up, I'd like to invite Hillary Francis. Hey, Hillary.
Good afternoon.
How are you?
I'm doing all right. How are you?
Not bad, not bad. Thank you for coming in and offering input.
Absolutely. So yes, my name is Hillary Francis. I am the Brattleboro Town Clerk, and I'm a member of the Vermont Municipal Clerks and Treasurers Association Legislative Committee. Sorry, it's a very long title.
They do that sometimes.
Yeah, I'm pleased to have been invited here today. I have prepared written testimony. If it's okay with the committee, I would like to read that.
Please proceed.
Okay, great. As some of you may know, Brattleboro, like many Vermont towns, is governed by a charter. And back in 2012, Brattleboro's charter was amended to require any person interested in being considered a write-in candidate to notify the town clerk prior to the close of polls on election day of their intent to run. All other write-in votes do not need to be counted or recorded in Brattleboro. Research indicates that 98% of local write-in votes seldom receive more than 1 or 2 votes, even in instances where there are no pre-printed candidates in a particular race. Write-in names often range from fictional characters to sole votes for oneself or a family member. In elections this year, I saw votes for kindergartners that I knew from our community that parents wrote in because, you know, they didn't have anybody else that they wanted to vote for. Here are some clear examples of issues with write-in votes that we as clerks oftentimes see. Often handwritten names are not complete, correct, or legible, and are passed over when counting write-in votes because the intent of the voter cannot be determined. Therefore, a write-in candidate may miss having votes counted in their favor. If ballot counters were provided with a list of write-in candidates, they would be on alert for those names and may be able to attribute votes to a particular write-in candidate, even though the name may not be complete. So some examples: John A. Smith is listed on the Brattleboro voter checklist. In counting votes for a particular race, we find write-in votes for J. Smith, J spelled J-A-Y Smith, and even Alan Smith. Ballot counters do not have enough information to know that John A. Smith generally goes by the name of Alan Smith, nor are they able to determine that write-in votes for any of these names are all for the same candidate. Mr. Smith may have received enough votes to be elected, but because ballot counters did not have sufficient information, they were not able to count all Smith's votes in his favor. The candidate declaration form asks for all names that the candidate is known by. I don't know if it's available technologically, but if I may share my screen for a moment, I can show you the candidate declaration form that we use in Brattleboro. Is that an option?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Can you all see this?
Yes.
So it's very simple. It just says the date of the election. In Brattleboro, we have 3 different districts. So we put what district, they put their name, they put any nicknames, or for in this example, John A. Smith goes by Alan, right? He would put that there. What seat he's running for, what office, what year term, right? Sometimes it's a 1-year term, a 2-year term, a 3-year term. He would sign it, put his contact information, and then we would put this information, we would fill in this information as to when we received it. So it's a very simple form. It's not a big ask of the candidates. So in Brattleboro alone, we have pages of voters who have the same or similar names. For example, Mark V. Spino, Mark W. Spino, Mary W. Spino. We also have a Stephen M. Brown and a Stephen M. Brown Jr. who are not related and in fact don't even know each other. Additionally, we have a justice of the peace named Mary Miller, but everyone knows her as Beverly Miller. So these are real examples for Brattleboro alone. And I just want to also share sorry, I'm going to share one more document just to show you an example. Okay, maybe I'm not. It's not showing up on my options to share. I'm just looking to see if I'm missing it. No. So, okay, but we have pages upon pages. When I testified in front of our select board on this very issue back in 2017, and I pulled together pages of names just in Brattleboro that are like those Mary and Mark Spinos, that are very similar or the same. So a number of years ago, a write-in candidate was elected as a Brattleboro representative town meeting member. When attempting to contact that newly elected town meeting member, it was discovered that there was a second adult member of the household with the same name. And so it was unclear as to who to credit the election with and who to count as the winner. If a write-in campaign is started for someone who has not agreed to accept the position and they win the seat but refuse it, then that position is filled by appointment. And so it doesn't go to the next highest vote getter. And so it sort of takes away that democratic process for the voters by appointing somebody instead of the voters choosing that person. And while not the main point of this, while the electronic tabulators tally votes for candidates whose names are pre-printed on the ballot, write-in votes need to be counted by hand, which can take several hours. And ballot counters are paid for their time. And I know in Brattleboro, our budget is being scrutinized very heavily, as I know it's the statewide budget as well. So every dollar that we pay counts. That's taxpayer dollars. Back in 2016, the Washington Post reported that there are 8 states where ballots won't even have a space for write-in candidates. In 32 other states, write-in candidates have to file with the state prior to the election to be counted as official candidates. Vermont is one of the few states where voters can write in anyone with no requirements. While the idea of simply requesting the write-in results is something, it does not mean the intent of the need to declare. It does not meet the intent of the need to declare. We currently have to report those names and numbers to the Secretary of State's office, so they're available for candidates to see anyway. What we're requesting you to consider is the need for candidates to actively make that declaration. Requiring the declaration allows poll workers to identify other names that the candidates may go by, therefore potentially allowing us to credit the candidate with more write-in votes. The only slight changes that I would recommend on this are that this be passed for all state and federal elections, not just for primaries. Anything we can do to make our elections more consistent benefits everybody, from the voters to the candidates to the poll workers. Right now, every election has different rules, and every election we have to retrain our poll workers and we have to re-educate the voters, and it gets very confusing. Local elections could be included in this, or it could be left up to each town at your discretion, and that the deadline for declaration be moved to the day before Election Day. While in Brattleboro, it's very easy for us to say 7 p.m., right? The close of polls is when people need to declare. If the Secretary of State's office needs to inform every clerk that there's a write-in candidate that they need to consider, in Brattleboro, we do have internet access, but we all know around Vermont, many clerks don't have internet access on Election Day and may not even have phone service on Election Day. If there is a power outage on Election Day, how are we making sure that the clerks get the information from the Secretary of State's office so that we're all counting those declared write-ins? And then in response to earlier comments, I would just state that I agree with the comment about timing of petitions. 5 weeks is way too tight for town clerks for all of the reasons that were stated. Additionally, this past year, for this past March election, we, in a very tight timeline, got our ballots, and the printing company had a new staff member who overscored the ballots, so folded them a little too hard. And when we took them out of the package, they all just sort of cracked in half. So we had to get in touch with the ballot printing company to have them mail us all new ballots, and we got them the day they had to go out. And so cutting a week out is just, it really hurts our ability to get ballots out in the timeline that we're required to by statute. And then I would also just state that one comment that was made about write-in candidates needing consent to be on the ballot, they're not actually on the ballot because they're not printed on the ballot. So when folks are writing their name in, they don't really need to consent to that. But this declaration is almost their consent so that we don't need to worry about them resigning because they're actively choosing to run for office. So on behalf of the Vermont Municipal Clerks and Treasurers Association, I value the time and attention that you're giving to this, and I appreciate that you're inviting members of the VMCTA to provide documents and testimony. I encourage you to continue to listen to all testimony as the town clerks are on the forefront of every election. And I'm happy to answer any questions, and I will submit my testimony in writing.
Thank you, thank you. Hand up with Representative Hango.
Thank you. I just had a comment. That was my point that I brought up about names appearing on the ballot, but I was referring to then the general election. The write-in candidate won the most votes, and then would they have to file a consent of candidate to appear on the general election ballot?
Okay.
And that was my question, and I'm sure it'll get answered by a future witness. Thank you.
Representative Waters Evans.
Hi, thank you for that. It's really informative. What if, can you just, I know it's not exactly the topic at hand, but sort of is. When you were just talking about the 7 p.m. deadline for the registration, how would you envision that working timing wise if there was a district with multiple towns and multiple clerks?
So the 7 p.m. deadline, I think is tough because of multiple districts. In Brattleboro, we do have 3 districts, but they all happen to vote at the same location. So it's very easy for me as the town clerk, right? We have a bulletin board that we have posted right outside as people are coming in, where we have sample ballots and the warning and instructions. And on that, we have a form for any candidates who have declared their intent to run as a write-in so that voters can see that. It's not in the polling location, it's outside. We also have that posted for early voting outside of the town clerk's office for anybody that we're aware of prior to, who's declared prior to election day, but maybe missed the petition filing deadline. When polls close at 7 o'clock, I don't know how many of you have sort of witnessed a polling location, but it is pure chaos, right? The media and the candidates are there, they're waiting for results. Our check-in folks are trying to balance their numbers to the tabulator tapes. We have a cleanup crew that's trying to clean up all of the equipment to clear out the voting hall. Meanwhile, we have counters that are sorting through thousands of ballots into districts and trying to figure out, okay, we've got to look through all of the ones that don't have write-ins to make sure there's no clear intent. And then we have to look through the write-ins and count those write-ins, right? So there's a lot of moving pieces. So when 7 o'clock hits, it's like, it's intense and it's chaotic. If we are waiting to hear from the Secretary of State's office at that moment in time, and again, if there's a power outage, if there's something that happens, it's doable, but it makes me, my type A personality, which is why I'm good at my job, it makes me nervous, which is why I think if the requirement was 5 p.m. on the Monday before, or whatever is deemed appropriate by the Secretary of State's office and you all, I think giving just a little bit of wiggle room for the unexpected makes sense and means that it's going to be equitable across all towns. Because again, there will be towns that don't have cell service, that don't have internet access, or holding the polling location outside of their office. during COVID, right? People had to hold polling locations outside. Right? So I think that we need to think about all of these different scenarios. And I would recommend, at least 24 hours prior to the close of polls, but whatever is deemed appropriate, but I don't think 7 p.m. makes the most sense.
Thank you.
Any other questions for our guest? Representative Scone.
I just want to bring up a point that she brought up. Some of these places don't have Wi-Fi. Like they're in a Grange Hall in the middle of nowhere with no Wi-Fi. How could they get that information at 7 p.m.? They'd have to leave in the middle of this chaotic moment at 7 p.m. to go find Wi-Fi on top of a hill and then come back, which just sounds chaotic. Thanks for bringing that up. There may not even be Wi-Fi in these places.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if there's nothing else for our guest here, we'll move on to thank you very much, and feel free to stay on in case there's reason for us to circle back to you if you don't mind.
Great, thank you.
Next, I'd like to bring up Chelsea. Welcome back, Chelsea.
Thank you for having us back. I agree with everything Hillary just said. We've had a lot of conversations among membership of the VMCTA as well as our legislative committee there. And we really have a lot of appreciation for all of your hard work on this bill, and also for the work that went into the amendment. So currently, in order to be elected, a write-in candidate needs to receive a number of votes equal to 1% of the registered voters of that town. In the town I serve, that would only be 10 votes. However, the majority of write-ins only get 1 or 2 votes. It's, as she was saying, someone writes in their brother to be funny or things like that. They just can't think of anyone they want to vote for, so they just write something down. And that means that clerks and our BCAs are spending hours after polls close, counting hundreds of names sometimes that will only get 1 or 2 votes. They're not going to win. Clerks don't need to know the party of the write-in candidates. I think that the form that Hillary uses in Brattleboro, and of course, we would defer to the Secretary of State's office on actually creating it, but I think it can just be really straightforward. What names do you want us to look for? Would be really great. Ideally, I noticed the language in the amendment. This applies to the primaries. Ideally, it would apply to all state and federal elections because we do receive a number of write-ins on all elections. Also, I just want to touch base on the fact that, as was discussed, not all towns do have internet access at polling places. And sometimes they don't even have cell service. So it would be difficult day of to get the information for some clerks, and there could be a workaround for them that you could work on with the Secretary of State's office. But currently, what the process looks like is we print our tally sheets, usually the evening before. Sometimes the Secretary of State's office has other guidance, and we go with that. And with this, we would have to probably print our tally sheets at 7 p.m. on election day. That would sometimes mean the clerk or their assistant or a BCA member, who are all needed at the time, to leave, go back to the office where there's a printer and print these sheets. My stack of tally sheets, for just a small town, we have 900 and something voters, was about this thick for the general election. So just to give a little context on some of the implications of waiting until 7 p.m. on the day of to present this information to the clerks. And that's pretty much all I have for the write-in candidate portion.
Oh, thank you. Any questions for Chelsea from folks? Representative Waters Evans.
Can you estimate what percentage of ballots, what percentage of ballots have a write-in on them? Is it like 10% of the ballots have someone's written someone in, or is it like 80? You know, is it most or?
It depends town to town. Some towns, I feel like each town has its own vibe,
Yeah,
if you will.
Yeah.
Some towns, the voters really like to stick with who's on the ballot. The town that I work for, the voters are very independent and they like to write down who they think is best, no matter who's on the ballot. Sometimes even writing down who's already on the ballot. So it's really hard. It's hard to say.
yeah. But in your town, then it sounds like it's most.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, interesting.
Any other questions for Chelsea from the table? All right, thanks, Chelsea.
Great, thank you.
And I canceled my 2:30 meeting, so. Yeah, tons of time. I would like to invite the Secretary of State's office up next.
Thank you so much for having us. Lauren Hibbert, Deputy Secretary of State, and I have with me.
John Sheehan, Elections Director at the Secretary of State.
And we'd like to address both amendments, but we'll talk about the amendment that we're talking of, that every other witness has talked about, but we would like to follow up again on the quote unquote Sibilia amendment as well. So the Secretary of State's office really appreciates the conversations that have been happening around the write-in provisions. We are pleased with where that section of the law has landed in the amendment on the table. However, we also have concerns about the 7 o'clock deadline. We do think that we need to have further conversations, particularly with our vendor and with the clerks, both the Town Clerk Association and the clerks that are not represented in the association, to fully understand the logistics of how that would work. We want to be very transparent that we may seek a change to that on the Senate side to make sure that it works logistically, but that we will honor the intent of this amendment if this amendment passes on the House floor. And I've been clear with the sponsor of this amendment that that's what we would do as well. We understand that a write-in would, the intent of the amendment is that someone could decide they want to be a write-in candidate as close to the end of the election as possible. But we need to make sure that the logistics of that work both for our office, for our vendor, and for the town clerks. So given the timing of this amendment, we have not had enough time to dig into that detail, quite frankly, and we need to do so. So that's our position on the 7 o'clock deadline. But this is a very important section for our office in the elections bill. We really do want this section to stay in the bill. We probably will have some other amendments to this section. Particularly, we think that there should be a consent by a write-in candidate who wins with a wedding signature. Right now, that is not in the law as written. And to be very clear, this is about statewide candidates, House, Senate, and up candidates. And the way this amendment is drafted, it covers the presidential primary, the general election, and the statewide primary. That's why the sections are repeated 3 times. We appreciate that it covers all of those 3 elections. Again, not to get too far in the weeds, but we want to talk about this with the clerks some more. We think that the form should just be filed with our office electronically to Representative Hango's question. We think that will be the smoothest way to communicate, and that our IT system will be the most efficient way to notify all clerks, as opposed to a candidate having to travel to every county. But again, those are changes that we're not necessarily asking this committee to make today because of the timeline. But we wanted to be very clear that those are things that we, if this amendment were to pass on the House floor, that we would be seeking around the write-in sections. There is a section that we are asking for an amendment on today, which is on page 7. It's section 2 of 2921. We appreciate and understand and do not intend to require people to create a checking account when they file with our office. We heard that concern. We also do not want people to pay for a checking account that they don't need. But the way that this is drafted also means that a candidate, if you read the entire section 2921(2), a candidate who accepts or expends any campaign funds shall file with the Secretary of State at the time of expending funds, obviously the bank account, and the name and address of the treasurer. We would like the name and the address of the treasurer to be disclosed when they file, regardless of whether they expend or accept money, because a treasurer is a very important person in a campaign and frequently is the one signing off on campaign finance filings.
Representative Hank.
So I'm not quite clear on this. But could you tell me this section again, section 13?
Section 13, at the bottom of page
Language
7.
Thank you. So
it goes on page 7 and page 8, line 20. The way that this is drafted, the candidate would not have to tell our office who the treasurer was until that added language is triggered. So until there's accepting or expending. We essentially, our ask is to move line 20, the name and address of the treasurer responsible for maintaining the checking account. So it would have to be, we think that a treasurer is important to be disclosed at all times, even if there's not a checking account, would be moved up into section A1 so that it's clear that the treasurer would be disclosed when the candidate files with our office. And it's clear, the law is clear that the candidate's treasurer can be the candidate themselves or their spouse. So a candidate could just say they're the treasurer and never have a checking account and never receive any money. But we'd like to know who is responsible for the funds of a candidate if and when they are starting to collect or spend.
So it's just an additional question to the consent of candidacy form that gets filled out.
It will be in our system, in our online system that everyone will do. And it is now, when a candidate files in our system, they have to disclose who their treasurer is. Just the way this language is drafted, I don't think it was intentional. I think the intent was to just preclude needing to get a checking account, as you heard from the sponsors of the bill. But the way that it's drafted, it also excludes having to disclose your treasurer until you spend. And that I don't think was intended. And if we could move into the other body with that intent clear, that's a piece that I think could be cleaned up and is more simple than the 7 o'clock deadline, which we are very committed to the write-in provisions staying. We want to make it work both for the sponsor of the amendment, but also for town clerks and our office. And that's just the piece that we haven't had enough time to really dig into. What is the right time and how can we do this logistically with multi-town districts? And so that's the piece that I want to forecast for this body or this committee that we may try and change on the other side.
I understand. I think that totally makes sense personally, but any questions? Break out with these things. So Mars.
I don't know if this is an appropriate question to ask, but I'm gonna ask them anyway. Would you?
I look forward to it.
I know, there's a big exciting setup, but it's not that exciting. Could you foresee a situation where someone could decide to run for a Senate position an hour before the polls close and they could actually win? I get it's in opinions, like.
I don't.
Okay.
I think that would be very difficult. But my understanding from the sponsor of this amendment is that if that were to occur, that person should not be foreclosed from being on the ballot. But I cannot foresee a situation where that would occur.
Are any other questions for the Secretary of State's office on this piece? I did want to open up some time to discuss the amendment that was spoken to yesterday. There were some conversations floating around committee members about windows of time after the primary. I don't want to position the question myself because it was thoughts that members were having, but I wanted to utilize the time we have here so those questions could be asked while we have their attention.
Thank you.
Representative Larda.
Always a question. Is there any period of time from that amendment that we heard about yesterday? Representative Sebelius amendment, is there any period of time that would be workable after the, is there any period of time between that would be acceptable for you for that independent filing?
Candidly, no. The only way we're able to make that work is, as I just want to echo what Director Sheehan said yesterday, that those periods of days, that Wednesday, Thursday, Friday before the primary, are the calm before the storm. We're answering a few questions about how do I set up my polling location, or where do I put the signs about the guns prohibited? Those were the questions that we were answering this primary. After the primary, it is very much like 7 o'clock on the polling close of polls. It is all hands on deck. People are working around the clock. Our team is working, putting in multiple hours of comp time. We are outstretched. And I just want to really emphasize to this committee, we're a team of 6 and we support all the clerks in this state. And we support them on a very wide variety of questions. And there's a lot of questions that come up after an election, particularly a statewide primary. And I can tell you, we just went through the town meeting day. Our office really does not have a role outside of supporting town clerks, but we received upwards of 75 calls from the public about what happened on town meeting day in their locations. So we also are answering questions not only for town clerks, but for the public. And we need to respond to the public so that they feel confident in the electoral process. So we do not have wiggle room to add something later in the process, specifically the independent candidate filing. And Director Sheehan did follow up about the question of how many times has this happened. And that testimony is posted on your website. But it is not a small number of people that file for independent candidacy, especially when you look over a span of years. Obviously, there are years that are have a lot more than others, but it is not a handful of people. It is a multitude of handfuls of people that do this. And we do have to look at all of the signatures on that petition. And that could be 500 signatures, that could be 100 signatures. That could be 50 signatures. It's not a small amount. And we need to verify that those signatures are true signatures. And putting that after the primary puts incredible strain on our office. And my biggest concern is, of course, I'm concerned about our staff who are already out straight, but I'm concerned about error. And I think anytime that we're making a decision like this, we need to think about what is the risk of error in our process. And Director Sheehan really walked through in great detail yesterday how many moving pieces are happening after the primary. And it's similar to the concern that was voiced by the minority leader on the local election piece. You heard her say the time is too short to push it up because we're preparing the ballots, we're getting them out for printing. It takes time to print. We need to get them back. That is the same concern that we have with moving this independent candidate filing, is if we move it any closer to when we have to have the ballots completely finalized and signed off by town clerks, by our 2 vendors, and then starting printing, we are going to introduce more room for error. And that's just, it's worrying, beyond worrying. It's not acceptable to the Secretary of State.
I think that's really important perspective, just on like workload capacity and being able to
Thank you for
understand the diligence that's needed with having to make sure the job is done right also.
And I just want to remind people, this is not, these are filings that may not affect just one ballot style. We have 283 ballot styles in the state. And though each of those has to be reviewed by multiple members of our team, and then the town clerks in all of those locations for all of those districts, and then by our vendor, who is our tabulator vendor, and then by our printing vendor. So that is a considerable amount of review. And when you add and subtract things, as Sean said yesterday, weird things happen. So when you add a name, then you have to make sure that another name didn't come off inadvertently. Whenever humans are touching files, things can happen. So it introduces a lot of concern for our office that errors will be made. And that's why we need this to be done before the primary.
Representative Hago?
My recollection is that several years ago, the date for the independence was different.
Yes.
And how did you make it work then?
That was before the requirement, the UOCAVA mailing to military members and overseas people. And our office asked for the filing deadline to be moved up specifically because we needed time to prepare the ballots, and the whole timeline shifted as a result of that federal legislation, the overseas ballots. So we just have an incredible crunch, and we support the UOCAVA voting deadline, and we are 100% committed to people getting their ballots so that they can participate, even if they're not within our state. But because of that new requirement, we had to move all of our deadlines to accommodate that.
Thank you. I really appreciate you jogging my memory. I think that was my first year on GovOps.
Anytime.
Any other questions for Secretary of State's office? No. Again, thank you very much for
Thank
your
you.
feedback and response time to amendments, which we appreciate you guys.
Happy to do it.
Yes. All right, committee. So right now, it seems that discussing the piece with the filing, the inclusion of the treasurer seems like one of the components. The question in and around primary versus or including general was answered, as well as both state and federal. So that question hashed itself out through testimony. Yes, Representative Cobb.
Yeah, I can't remember because we've taken so much testimony on this over a bunch of days. Independents, they can still file in that window just before the, so that 3-day, that 72-hour prior.
Yes, because that's how it stands now. Yes.
So that would stay the same.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And that was the conversation in and around the civilian proposal.
Yeah.
So I guess the one thing actually we didn't ask you folks about was the 5-day that got brought up. Which was on the primary as introduced, that got flagged for us. It was like that page 30.
The 5 weeks?
The 5 weeks, excuse me, 5 weeks.
Yes,
excuse
5
me,
weeks.
Friday
versus the
brain,
municipal-
Friday brain.
That's municipal elections.
Yes, the 5th Monday as opposed to the 6th Monday.
Yes. Yeah, Sean, you can answer that.
That was the only thing that I think is still hanging. With you.
Introduce myself, Sean. No, we agree. I know all the testimony has been long and probably blurring together, but when we testified a couple weeks ago about the original version of the bill, we did flag that for concern. We didn't weigh in strongly. We defer to the clerks. It's the local election. We defer to the Clerks Association for that, but it did catch our attention as well because everything we're moving, knowing that more and more clerks are doing universal vote by mail, needing that window, how crunched they are. Moving to make sure there's adequate time. So we did flag that in our testimony from a couple of weeks ago to look into and change, not make that change if clerks express the crunch, which we expected they would.
Okay, so reverting back to the 6th Monday proceeding. Gotcha. Thank you, Mr. Director. So the next. Oh, sure, everybody.
No, just figure.
I guess the next step is having a quick conversation with sponsors of this proposal about the treasurer component. And we'll figure out how we want to deal with the 6th to the 5th preceding Monday. And then the understanding, of course, that we're gonna hold it, any more action on this until Tuesday. We're probably gonna have a committee call time of 9 a.m. so we can go over this stuff cleanly, because the bill is on the floor Monday. I'm sorry, Tuesday. Thank you. Good brain. So yeah, legislative Monday. So we're gonna put that on committee discussion and vote review of the changes once we speak to the co-sponsors on this for Tuesday morning at 9 a.m. just so folks are aware, because I still want to maintain the timeline of presenting this bill on the floor on Tuesday, but also afford us the weekend to understand that we have the language as tight and crisp and as universally agreeable as possible. So
definitely plan 9.
I would
9 and 2.
bake it into the math, yeah. So does anybody have any other feedback or comment before we go offline and start dotting i's and crossing t's?
No, I just wanted, we're gonna have plenty of discussion.
Yes. Yep, that's why I wanted to come in for an hour.
If this wouldn't annoy everyone, and maybe it's just for me, but would it be possible to just do like summary of the differences from the amendment to the actual bill side?
Like a side by side? Yeah, I mean, we could ask Tim Tucker to do that for us when we, yeah. I see a hand, Bill.
No, I was stretching.
Just making sure I'm not missing cues here.
That's a good idea, because I was gonna ask somebody, because I'm like, I'm gonna have to have everything next to it.
Yeah, we're just getting to the point in your first year where we start asking for side by sides. They are a useful resource.
Now you can drive on your.
Rosetta Stone.
Because this is so confusing. Let's hear a vote, and all these amendments, and it's like, good lord, when we're supposed to be testifying on this on the floor?
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Tuesday,
Yeah.
can you go through the timeline of what to expect for next week, just to get it out there? On this, like, I thought we were gonna testify on this on Tuesday,
Right, well,
and we didn't, and then we've had amendments, and then we've had more amendments, and right now it's just feeling really muddy and disorganized, so I was wondering if you can clarify what the pie in the sky plan is for this bill so that we can be prepared.
I thought I just did. We're gonna.
Can you do it again?
Yeah, sure.
For clarity then.
So we're gonna have organized language once we talk to the sponsors. We're gonna get that out as soon as possible. Ask for a side by side. People have ample time to review before we meet at 9 a.m. on Tuesday. The 10 o'clock floor time. And my plan is to not postpone action on this bill again and do the report. Second reading on the floor. And we'll take a position on these amendments Tuesday before we go up.
So our reading of it would be on Wednesday, no, Tuesday.
We're scheduled currently to report the bill on Tuesday.
Second reading.
So I'm doing the bill report, you're doing a section, your section will change.
No, just that 6 to the bit.
Just the 6th to the 5th.
All of
Yeah.
my sections apparently will change, but what I believe is going to happen is that we are also going to vote on the amendments, correct, on Tuesday, and then we are going to have to report on those amendments also. Not a ton of time to get ready, but I think we can prepare. The only concern I have, to Mary Catherine's point, is I hope that we have enough time to really discuss and do the work we need to do to get to a good place, given that we have an hour before floor and before we're reporting the bill.
That's what I was wondering, like discussing the bill as a whole. We're also gonna be discussing these amendments. People want a side by side, which I think is valid, and we're gonna be here at 9. We have to be on the floor at 10. And people in this committee not only have to like be on the floor, but you may have to recraft your testimony based on what we do. So we're gonna do all of that in an hour.
Well, I think that if we do like work over the weekend, we can potentially get there. If we don't feel we're prepared, I can always ask the speaker for another postponement.
We can expect a side by side video paper that Tucker created Monday.
To get it to you, that's what I'm saying, like, I wanna get this stuff teed up, so we have it Monday to review, it's not all gonna hit there. Yeah.
That's what I'm trying to make sure.
But we're also,
Won't have a decision.
yeah. I'm not opposed to postponing again, I would just rather try and stick to the deadline. Representative Pistol.
Is there any objection to starting at 8:30?
I'll be here by 7:30, so I don't care.
Well, I had
It is a
child.
lot to ask
Yeah.
people to,
Yeah, I think that's a
Yeah,
good
you
way.
guys can start
If
now.
it's too tight, yeah, we kick it another day because we want to have a good product.
Right.
No, I agree.
We don't want to pass the bills to the Senate to fix.
No, and the thing is, I wanna, we've already postponed this. 3 legislative days, 4 legislative days, but I
You want
wanna,
to try to avoid it.
I wanna try avoid doing that again.
Yeah.
So focusing on that as a target is my preference, but also knowing that if we don't feel like we're ready, I'll ask the speaker. For postponement for a legislative day. Representative Hango.
I have another question that I'd like to ask the Secretary of State's office, just for my clarity, if that's okay. Thank you. I'm going back to the amendment that pertains to the independent filing date. And I know about the UOCAVA, and I was here when we passed that that provision to allow it to be, to give you some breathing room. Major party candidates, remind me from your timeline yesterday, when you need to know from them, like, who is gonna be on ballot? Like, how do you, is there a time frame where you know the results of the election? And I know there's a timeline on that.
That's 6.
You get what I'm,
Yeah, right. That was the question that came up, and there'd been the amendments to it and some changes about whether they'd be allowed. But under current law, and I think now with these amendments, if the primary doesn't result in a candidate, being elected for the major party has up to 6 days. So that would be the close of business on the following Monday, which allows us time within our timeline. I think a big distinction we had on there is really twofold. As I noted on my timeline, if it's coming in, if the party is nominating somebody, it's a much simpler set of paperwork. There's no petitions for that person, I think, which is the point that Representative Waters Evans was raising before as well, kind of a lower bar for the parties, the law to come in. That also means it's a lower bar, easier for our office to process, and there's not that room for error. Whereas when people come in with petitions, if there's errors with the petition, they fail, have them. It takes us 72 hours under current law, I think, with the proposal, 2 business days to review and then get back to the candidate if there's errors and if they need to cure petitions. And that's really where it could drag out when you're talking about filings with independents or filings back in the spring with the major parties. If there's errors with filings, then you extend out that 10 days that are needed to cure the petitions. And that's really when, if it was moved after, it would be twofold. One, it would be the burden on my staff pieces we talked about, just not having any room in our capacity in those days from the primary election through the canvass in particular right after that. But second, even if it was moved to that stage, even if we did have, additional staff for the allocation, you open that risk that you're pushed out another 13 days from when the deadline is to allow for the review time and the curing of conditions.
Thank you. I think I understand that. Thank you.
So as it is now, I should say, there is the window where even though it's the Thursday before Thursday before the primary for independence, somebody comes in that Thursday, the review period could be to the next Monday, the day before the primary. And then the cure period, it could be, we certainly are reviewing petitions that come after, but it's, smaller proportion at that stage. Whereas if the deadline was moved after, you'd have obviously a big load, and then you'd have the whole tail from the review and the cure.
Okay, thank you.
All right, it's been a long week. We're at 3:00. So as far as laying out sort of a timeline, we framed it in, and we'll chart that for the course right now, but obviously, that we may be nimble in the moment if nimbleness is necessitated. Any other questions for any of our folks in the gallery before we go off? Nope. All right, cool. Autumn, close it up.